Vamos a entrar ya a continuación a la primera conferencia magistral que tenemos programada para el día de hoy, en esta primera jornada. Recordamos que este congreso se realiza desde hoy, 1 de diciembre, hasta el 5 de diciembre, en el que en horas de la tarde-noche se realizará la clausura del mismo. Vamos a tener entonces la primera conferencia magistral, cuyo tema es COVID-19, Nuevo Orden Mundial, Perú. El tema específico es el COVID-19, implicaciones futuras, y va a estar a cargo de Jerome Glenn, presidente de The Millennium Project de Estados Unidos. Vamos a tener una breve reseña de su experiencia. Jerome Glenn es director ejecutivo de The Millennium Project, con 67 nodos en todo el mundo. Es autor principal de los informes State of the Future desde 1997, coeditor de Future Research Methodology 1.0-3.0 y diseño y gestiona el Global Future Intelligence System. Inventó la rueda del futuro y conceptos como tecnología consciente, instituciones transtelenacionales, economía de autorrealización, fuga de cerebros femeninos y definiciones de seguridad ambiental, inteligencia colectiva y escenarios. Envió su primer correo electrónico en el año de 1973 y a mediados de la década de 1980 fue fundamental para lograr la conmutación de paquetes X.25 en 29 países en desarrollo, lo que fue clave para que luego obtengan acceso a Internet a bajo costo. Esta es una breve reseña de quién va a estar con nosotros en esta primera conferencia magistral COVID-19, Nuevo Orden Mundial, Perú, a cargo de Jerome Glenn, a quien le brindamos la bienvenida y le indicamos que tiene a partir de este momento hasta las 10:20 para su conferencia. Welcome, Jerome. Adelante, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Are you able to see my screen at this point? Yes or no?
Yeah, Jerry, we can see it.
Yes, you can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. When the pandemic in the United States became clearly a problem, the American Red Cross was so overwhelmed with providing shelters and support for people in the fires in California and the floods in the Gulf and the East Coast, they were not able to look ahead to the pandemic. So they asked us to look ahead just a few years to see what they had to plan for. We did this report called Three Futures of the COVID-19 Pandemic in the United States, January 1st, year 2022, implications for all. That can be downloaded free of charge. And we hope that other countries will do their own scenarios because this pandemic is not going away tomorrow morning. We still need to look at what needs to be done. So this report, it's a 145-page report. It's rich in detail. The scenarios do not simply describe an end condition of 2022. They tell a story from the present tense to that future condition with cause and effect links that illustrate decisions so that one can taste and touch, so to speak, the possibilities of the future to stimulate your own thinking. We included about 250 medical professionals, health professionals, public health, emergency relief, and as well as futurists and economists in this process. Each of these scenarios is about 10 pages. I believe they've been translated into Spanish, by the way, now. And these can be not only useful for people that need to plan a bit, I think they're also useful for the general public to get a feeling of what's coming up, that they can plan for in their own life and get ready for in their own life. We're not telling the truth of the future. We don't know that, as was pointed out just before, but we can organize the uncertainties into here's the worst situation, here's the best situation, and here's a mix of the situation. The American Red Cross gave us a nice little quote there that these were the best that they've seen. We think that they are. The other scenarios, we did a lot of research before we began to see what other people wrote, and they tend to be describing an end state rather than actual scenario of how you get there. So the three scenarios, scenario one is America endures. This is a mix of positive and negative. It does assume that President Biden did get elected simply because that was a trend projection. The data was there. So these are straight surprise-free sort of scenarios. Scenario two, everything gets messed up even worse than now. And if you have friends that are too positive, they can read scenario two. That'll depress them a bit. The economics and the cascading of one industry closing down, causing another to close down, causing another to close down, and the cascading of that continues around the world in scenario two. That's a real serious problem. And number three, things go right. There's a national integrated strategies. The vaccinations work well, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we tried to take a holistic approach to this so that we were as interested in the social well-being as much as we were with the economics, as much as we were with the health and medical aspects of it, because these things interact. Because you have the health impact, which then leads to the economic impact, which then also leads to the mental illness problems. And the mental illness problems, the world's not focused enough on that one as yet. We listed some insights. Each of these scenarios is 30 pages. So that's 10 pages. So that's 30 pages of detail. So it's hard to distill 30 pages down to just a few points, but here's my own views on this. One, expecting the vaccines to take care of it and solve the problem is unwise. We're going to have to plan through and think through just getting the vaccines. The effectiveness of the vaccines will vary, and the percents of people getting them will vary around the world. So if you have a vaccine that's, let's say, 90% effective, but then you only have half your people getting vaccinated, you don't get to enough immunity to stop the spread. The difference between the positive scenario and the negative scenario within just a year and a half is a gigantic difference. And what makes that difference, the difference is what we as individuals do. Because we can download apps for contact tracing. Most of us don't do that, but we could do that. We could also do the masks and the saving and all. So it's what the humans do now over the next few months is to a large degree going to determine how well we can move toward the positive versus the negative. So the scientists are going to do their work, the logistics will do their work, but we have to do our work too. Most likely is that the worst is yet to come. Now, we wrote these, we published these about a month or 2 months ago, and unfortunately, that's what's happening right now. And the worst is still yet to come, because we've got the problem, as you know, with Christmas coming up and New Year's and a lot of crowding. Another problem is what's made this one so difficult is this 40% don't show any symptoms, but they can spread. So you got a cold, you got it. But with this one, 40% don't have it. And that's a real problem. So the people can spread it without knowing it. And it can also go not only through Latin America, but also through Africa, South Asia, come back up into Europe and North America and Japan. And as it keeps cycling around, it can mutate. If it mutates enough, and the vaccines we have to come up with different vaccines and slow us down as well. So we're going to have to learn how to live with this like we do with AIDS. We've got some treatment for AIDS, the death's gone down, but it's still there. And so we have to learn how to live with this for a while until it evolves into a less dangerous virus, as other viruses have done in the past as well. More insights from scenarios. Well, it's important for every country to have a whole of nation approach. That's pretty obvious. The United States has not done that. We are the worst example on that situation, and we hope that all of you have that better. The other is the psychological support systems are going to be much more important. A lot of poorer countries don't have mental health facilities in that, but we're really going to need that. Whether we go to traditional healers or local community services, but we've got to anticipate that we're going to have to do more about the mental well-being of society as a result of this than we have so far. U.S. leadership will come back in with Biden. There'll be better coherence with G7, G20, the World Health Organization, and this is going to shorten the time where we can respond to this. Now, the COVID pandemic has increased a lot of our problems that were already in place. We know that the concentration of wealth is increasing. Well, this is increasing it. As you notice, the stock market is going way up, but the other half of much of the society is going way down. So we're having increased widening of the income gaps. Because we're taking some labor out of the workplace and putting more into artificial intelligence, that means that return on capital, as people invest into it, they can get a better return on technology and financial systems than they can on training people, unfortunately. Future technologies will be able to replace much of what we're doing, repetitive work. So it means that long-term structural unemployment is a surprise-free forecast to be expected, and we have to think about what needs to be done in order to anticipate this. We wrote another report called Work and Technology 2050, where we had also scenarios, but we also had 97 actions in there that each one was internationally assessed, by the way. It's extremely detailed. But this is useful for people that actually have to take responsibility for what their countries and their companies and their people, their universities, their organizations, their families, what they should be doing. Because the big impact of the technology, especially artificial, what's called general intelligence. Artificial narrow intelligence is what we have today. The AI that drives a car doesn't diagnose cancer. But general intelligence can do both and also address novel problems. That may never happen, but it probably will. I'll take a bet. Again, we don't know the future, but I'll take a bet that maybe in 10 to 15 years, we'll have what's called artificial general intelligence. And that's the thing that has the big impact, not the narrow, because you can plan for that a bit. You say so many people drive trucks, and here's a phasing in of robot trucks. You can know if they're building them and selling. You can plan ahead. It's a linear thing. You can retrain people and look for other jobs. But general intelligence hits across the whole systems fast. And that can hit simultaneously around the world. It doesn't have to, because general intelligence uses the Internet of Things, it uses sensor networks, it uses other AIs, it can even imitate a human being doing an interview with you. So the general intelligence is a big thing, but we have time to plan ahead for that and to think ahead for that, and countries should do that. And that's what that other report, the Work Technology 2050 does. I recommend that you take a look at that. So, many commentators have made the comment that you futurists, you keep saying that this automation is going to cause all this unemployment, and every time something happens, we get more work. You know, the computer replacing the typewriter didn't mean fewer people working. It meant all kinds of people are more working in software. So what's different this time? Well, I identify 7 things I think are different this time. 1, speed matters. The acceleration of technological change, it really matters. The next 10 years will be much faster technological change than the last 10 years. And we know there's been a lot of difference in the last 10 years, last 25 years, out next 25 years. The future's change will make the past change look slow. 2, globalization and the interaction and the synergies among the new technologies. Your cell phone integrates calendar, flashlight, video, all kinds of things. Whereas in the past, a technology was one use, vacuum cleaner, a car, etc. But now we're integrating all of these things faster and faster and faster. And the faster we're able to integrate them, the faster we're continuing to integrate them, because they're also being micro-miniaturized. So the combination of the globalization of technology, the interactions of the technology, and the synergies of the technology also is new. Now you can say, well, we had some of that before. Yeah, but a matter of increase makes a difference. Like water, you made it a little colder, it's still water, a little colder, it's still water, then all of a sudden it's ice, right? So we're at that point of ice, as Ryle was talking about before. Another paradigm's coming up, another way of coming up is going to be different. 3 is we did not have a global platform for transfer of technology, for collaboration in the transition from the industrial age to the information age. The information age brought with it the internet. Now you can transfer technology and software instantaneously with no errors. When I was involved in putting packet switching in a lot of developing countries back in the early 1980s, I had to get into a jet plane. Then maybe someone wouldn't agree at the other end. Well, now you press a button and the software is transferred because we have a system to increase globalization of change. We did not have that before. And that system now is available to virtually 2/3 of the world, and essentially to almost the entire world. So that all of us can be surrounded by all of us, doing access all kinds of things we never could do before. Another is standardization of databases. When scientific progress is enhanced by standardization of databases and protocols, so the scientific breakthroughs will increase. We're getting into what's called computational science, you may know. So that means that you can do many experiments very fast and increase your insights much faster than before and broader. 5, we used to have a chance to get used to something. Like, for example, the laptop I'm using right now is not a whole lot different than the laptop I had in 1992, almost 30 years ago. Well, yes, it has more capabilities, more storage, but it's still a little screen and a little keyboard, and I can carry it around. So I got used to the idea of having a laptop for 30 years. As AI learns, and then learns how to learn faster, and then as we go into the general, that means that we don't get a chance. It's like every time you have a new software, you say, oh my God, I got used to using the last one. Now I got different menu, different icons. Oh, I got to learn all over again. Well, that unfortunately looks like that's going to continue. We don't get a chance to have a plateau of taking it easy. Maybe we will hit that at some point, but I don't see that coming up in the short term. So that's another factor to change, which means the implications of that on jobs is a very big deal. You have a job, it's going a certain way, but then the conditions change. And then it changes again. Changes again. We also have billions to create their own kind of enterprise and connect with markets around the world, which means that what the quote labor market is going to be in more flux than before as well. And 7, and last, machines can learn to do what you do and do it better than you. That's also new. So those are 7 reasons I would say the times are different today than before, and the economic impact on jobs will be different than in the past transitions. Now, the transition I want to stress here is we are in the process of offloading on civilization all the things that need the infrastructure to make life survive. Not necessarily worthwhile, but survive. Just in the same way, the human body, we have the autonomic nervous system that runs our heartbeat and digestion and all these things we don't want to do. So by having the autonomic nervous system in our body, it allows our frontal brain to be creative. So think of the same thing with society. Society is developing an autonomic nervous system for the whole world, slowly but surely, so that we will be able to free up our imaginations and our minds far more than before. So I was asked to talk about a few words about short-term, mid-term, and long-term. So short-term, the pandemic speeds up the applications of AI. I just read recently that the mayor of Milano, Italy, had a 10-year plan for doing some smart city stuff, and now they're implementing it now, beginning. So they speeded up the 10-year plan, and I'm seeing this all over the place, because if there's going to be more and more people vulnerable, and if they're going to work at home, what other systems can be automated? If you take in a business from market research all the way to product evaluation, sales, everything, what element all the way along the line is repetitious that can be automated? And that's happening right now very fast. So I think that narrow AI, not the general AI, but the narrow AI, single purpose AI, artificial intelligence, applications for repetitive work that cannot be done at home will increase, and that's increasing. The other is tele-everything. Futurists have been talking, since the 60s about the information, and 70s about the information revolution coming up, and information age, and knowledge economy, all that. And well, now more and more people realize, get used to the idea of working at home. I don't have to get in a jet plane to give you this speech. You'll also have it recorded so you can see it later on. You get the PowerPoint so you can think about it and look at it later on. Whereas in the old days, if I get in the plane, give the speech, and leave again, you don't necessarily get as much value, frankly, but it's a lot cheaper. You don't have to pay my hotel. You don't have to pay a speaker's fee. You don't have to do airplane. Saves a lot of money. So teleeducation, people are getting used to. Telemedicine more, telework, everybody gets connected. So that gets accelerated as well. The international trade and supply chains clearly are being reevaluated. That's a big deal. How that's going to shake out is going to be interesting to see. The unemployment increases, of course. The business failures are increasing, and the recessions and depressions look like they're going to be increasing. Financial support systems for people and business have got to be taken seriously. In my own country, United States, when we had the Depression, there was financial support for people, and it helps begin to solve the problem. Because it began to solve the problem, President Roosevelt says, okay, we don't need to do anymore for a while. And then it backslided. And then, of course, World War II came after that. So the financial support systems are going to have to be in place longer than people think. We're going to have to plan according to that. We're going to work it out. There's a lot of things in process I'm sure you're aware of in every country. But we're going to have to think about holding those financial systems longer than we're talking about today. And you can use those 97 actions in the Work Technology 2050 report. So a lot of that is relevant to the pandemic. In the midterm, which I would call 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to have increased sensors all over the place, sometimes for counterterrorism stuff, but also for the COVID. We want to be able to detect that little virus is changing around the place. So we'll have increasing sensors, more applications, environment monitoring, including sewer systems. As you know, you can monitor a city's sewer system to see what viruses are changing. It gives you a sense of the whole city. Monitoring trash for disease control. Second, more labor will be taken out of the production process. That was in process already. The pandemic has speeded it up. Now, you got two forces going on. On one hand, you take labor out of the production process or reduce it, your prices should go down along with the technological efficiencies. On the other hand, because we're going to have so much financial support worldwide, that is a force for inflation. So it's not quite clear how these two forces will work out, but they will be working out over the next 5 to 10 years for sure. We'll move more toward a self-actualizing economy in the sense that more and more people will realize they can begin to make a living a little bit on how they can find markets for themselves around the world. Because if the jobs locally have gone down enough and staying down long enough, you got to survive. So begin to think about who you are, what are your interests, what are your skills, what are you doing that somebody else might be interested in paying a small amount for it. For example, if I'm in Paris, saying hello to Ryle over there, I might say, well, I'm going to go to the Louvre tomorrow morning. So I can put it in my little system. I'm going to the Louvre. Anybody want to go with me? I'll have my little contact lenses or my camera, but I'll take it with you through the Louvre. So maybe out of the whole world, maybe 100 people are really interested. And I'm going to charge them €1 or $1. And so a lot of people say, no problem. I can sort of look in to see what's going on in the Louvre. I was always curious. And so I go to the Louvre. I'm walking down the various areas and I'm seeing the area on Egypt stuff. And somebody says in the contact here, hey, can you walk down there? I want to see what the pharaoh looks like over there. Well, I can walk over there. And then people are talking back and forth. So we're sharing information about Egypt. So we're having a conversation while we're going through the Louvre. It makes it a rich experience, but only for like $1, right? Now, at the end of the time, I might want to have a nice leisurely lunch. Well, 100 people with €100 it's a €100 lunch. Pretty fancy. I was going to have lunch anyway. I was going to go to the Louvre anyway, but here I made €100 doing what I wanted to do anyway. That kind of thinking will be, I think, will increase more over the next 5 to 10 years. Longer term, the self-actualization economy could become much more dominant because the scenarios that we did on the work technology, the assumption was you still need about 1 billion people to run the world's infrastructure. Yes, a lot of AI will be there, as I mentioned, but you still have to have some people in the loop. So we still figure you still need about 1 billion people for that. And the workforce by 2050 will probably be about 6 billion people. Population closer to 9, but the workforce may be like around 6. So if 1 billion is working and employed and has bosses and the normal sort of things you can think about, what about the other 5 billion? And some people say, well, this STEM, science, technology, education, that'll solve it. We'll do that. How many people can really make a living that way? That's part of that 1 billion. So the other 5 billion is going to have to figure out how to make a living out of creating their own worlds and their own connectivity. And longer term trend is the integration of and miniaturization of technology in and on our bodies, and the intelligence and voice synthesis and voice recognition outside of our bodies, so that we will have essentially a continuous flow between human consciousness and technology. And how well we manage that flow will determine to a large degree what kind of civilization we have. Now, a good thing about this pandemic is the whole world has got a timeout. For the parents in the audience, when your children are acting up too much, they're a pain in the neck, you say, stop, time out, sit down, think about what you're doing wrong, behave yourself. All right. We're doing that on a world basis. We've never done this as a society before. When people rethink, sometimes they come up with some good ideas. But this is the first time humanity as a whole is beginning to think together. I mean, I'm like this as an example, but other sorts of groups like, what's the future of economics? Does it always have to be this way? There's different economic systems. There's groups rethinking the economic systems, rethinking education systems, rethinking medical systems, rethinking tourism, and so forth. So we're having a global timeout to rethink. What will emerge out of that? I'm willing to bet, not knowing, but willing to bet, it'll be a combination of that self-actualization economy evolving and the conscious technology. So the engineers design to increase the conscious involvement of what they design. So if you're designing, for example, a cup of coffee, You might have, for example, some, I'm just thinking about this quickly, you might have some little sensors in here, very little tiny sensors for pressure. So as you put the coffee in, there's a certain signal. As I drink my coffee, the pressure goes down. So then that sends a signal to the kitchen to say, hey, bring in some more coffee. Now that's making the coffee cup, it's not really conscious, but it seems to be more conscious because it makes a decision, gets the kitchen to do something, and comes back, I get some more coffee. So imagine anything that you design, how can it enhance consciousness? How does it make us more alive, more sentient, more evolved? Not just doing it efficiently, but affecting the consciousness. And then hopefully with improved consciousness, as we're slowly evolving a global consciousness, and the pandemic is helping us to think more as a family than we ever thought before, because it's hitting all of us, right wing, left wing, communist, capitalist, it's hitting all of us to think together, that we may have some new paradigm shifts coming out of this. I think that's very likely. After World War II, now that involved a lot of people, but not everybody. After World War II, we began serious multilateralism, United Nations, all kinds of international agreements. We didn't have much of that before, but the disaster of World War II helped create a new growth of civilization. I suspect that we will have another new growth after this. Just a few words about the Millennium Project. We have 67 nodes around the world. And this, a node is a group of people and institutions that connect local thinking with the global thinking, and the global thinking with the local thinking, so that we can do global futures research around the world. So like when we do something on the COVID-19, send out a note, who knows the most about the health medical situation in your country on the COVID. So we can collect all of those thinking and bring together the thinking of that and then feed it back. So the nodes is the global local. You hear about global local. Well, that's our management answer to global localism, is how we can do global and local at the same time. Then we have regional networks like the Foresight European Network, the European nodes, and also in Latin America, Ibero-American Network, RIBER as well, that has other people as well as the Millennium Project, but mostly Millennium Project nodes. And these nodes carry out workshops, they translate. This, for example, the Spanish translation was put together by the Latin American nodes. The next slide here, this is, I don't expect you to read all this. All this is simply saying is, we're trying to do a cumulative research. In other words, yes, we've done 56 futures research projects around the world, but it's like your brain. New information comes in, it associates with other previous stuff, and it has new insights. So we would like to do the same thing. Each of these studies informs us. So that's why we're able to make such rich scenarios and improve those scenarios through time. For those of you that are interested in doing futures research in your country, this is a very nice resource. It has 39 chapters with an introduction and concluding, which means that there's 37 different methods. So when people say, well, I do futures research, I do scenarios. Yeah, that's one, 37 different methods to explore the future. And since we don't know the truth of the future, we don't know the best ways to look at the future, our attitude is there's a lot of different ways of doing it and cross-reference the different ways. So this is a research, it's Futures Research Methodology 3.0. It's the richest internationally peer-reviewed set of methods, to my knowledge, in the world. So you can receive any of these different reports going to that website. And I hope there's a little bit of time for questions if possible. Thank you. Hello. Anybody out there?
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much por su participación, Jerome Glenn, presidente de The Millennium Project. Thank you very much. Nos ha presentado la conferencia magistral COVID-19, Nuevo Orden Mundial con el tema específico COVID-19 implicaciones futuras. Definitivamente, en este año, la pandemia y este nuevo virus que se ha presentado en el mundo ha traído una serie de complicaciones y nos ha hecho en todo nivel mundial adoptar nuevas formas de convivencia. Y precisamente una de ellas es esta manera que tenemos hoy de poder interactuar, de poder comunicarnos, de poder continuar con nuestras actividades, como es este congreso, que hubiera sido seguramente en un auditorio importante, poder recibir a todos y con la misma calidad de las ponencias, pero esta vez lo tenemos que hacer de manera virtual, porque así nos exige la nueva forma de vivir, la nueva convivencia que tendremos que adoptar por un tiempo más, por lo menos, porque esto no creo que se pueda solucionar a muy breve plazo. Muy bien, gracias por todos los conceptos impartidos a Jerome Glenn. Estamos seguros que cada uno de ellos ha sido escuchado con mucha atención y vamos a tener en cuenta cada una de sus opiniones referente a este tema que hemos tratado. Vamos a tener en el desarrollo de este congreso diversas ponencias que tienen que ver con muchos temas, no solamente de relacionado a la pandemia que tenemos, como es el COVID-19, sino también en educación, en ciencia, en tecnología, en seguridad alimentaria, agricultura del futuro. De modo que es una mañana, por lo menos en la primera parte de este primer día, va a estar sumamente nutrida, digamos, de conceptos y conocimientos que vamos a poder conocer y también tener en cuenta para el desarrollo de nuestra actividad profesional, que siempre se preocupa el Colegio de Ingenieros y el Instituto de Prospectiva y Desarrollo Estratégico de brindarnos las herramientas necesarias para poder estar actualizados y también tener una variedad de, un abanico de conceptos que nos permitan desarrollarnos de la mejor manera. Muchas gracias. Vamos a tener ahora la primera ponencia de esta mañana con el tema Educación siglo XXI, aunque tenemos unos minutos todavía de digamos, tiempo, pero vamos anunciando lo que vamos a tener a continuación. La primera ponencia es el tema Educación siglo XXI, y el tema específico va a ser el debate sobre la transformación de la educación, perspectivas del presente y del futuro. Sabemos perfectamente que este tema, la educación, también ha sido tocado por esta pandemia. Y la educación en algún momento se detuvo y ahora luego se ha comenzado a retomar, implementar de manera virtual. Algunos opinan que no es lo más óptimo, que no es lo mismo, pero yo creo que con un poco de esfuerzo, un poco de dedicación, vamos a poder aprovechar de la manera virtual de seguir teniendo esta educación y en el futuro, poco a poco, creo que vamos a poder retomar de manera presencial ya el tema de la educación, pero que también en todos sus aspectos es muy importante, la educación permanente, que actualizada en todos los niveles para quienes están pendientes de este tema. Quien va a estar a cargo de esta primera ponencia es Axel Didrikson Takayanagi. Él es investigador de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México y coordinador de cátedra de la UNESCO. Él es de México. Entonces, voy a hacer una breve reseña de quien va a tener esta primera ponencia, pero antes vamos a dejar un espacio para las preguntas que se quieran formular a Jerome Glenn, presidente de The Millennium Project. Entonces, adelante, por favor, con las preguntas para nuestro conferencista magistral que ha tratado el tema COVID-19, Nuevo Orden Mundial Perú. Adelante, vamos a ver el chat algunas preguntas que se puedan realizar. A ver, hay una pregunta, Sharon, y dice, esperamos un nuevo orden en donde se trabajará menos horas y dediquemos más horas a otros temas.
Is there any translation possible?
A la traducción. Ahí está la traducción, creo, en el chat. Jerome.
Ah.
Oh, las
Okay, I see
questions in the chat.
Okay, I see one question here about we wait for new order where we work fewer hours and dedicate more hours to leisure. Okay, good. Now, when you're doing what you like, you tend to want to do it more, right? So the hours of quote work may actually be longer. For example, I like talking about future. I like interacting with different people around the world. So I work more hours now than I worked before when I was working some conventional job that started at 9 and ended at 5. So I'm not sure you have fewer hours, but you also create your own schedule this way. If you get a good idea to do something interesting on Sunday afternoon, you can do it. You don't have to get into the bus and go to the office or go to the factory on Sunday afternoon. You're right there, right? So that's one concept, is if you are doing those things and making a living out of the stuff that you like, you'll probably work more hours, but they'll be flexible hours, what time you do the work. Because if you want to do something with your children on a Wednesday afternoon, you can do it. You don't have to say, well, I got to wait until 5:30 before I can play with my children. No, you can play with your children at noon if you want to. Now, concept of leisure. The original idea of leisure time did not mean when you're not working. The original concept meant you could do the work at your leisure, meaning you decide when you will work and when you'll not work, when you'll sleep and when you'll not sleep. So doing things at your leisure. So work, play, and leisure slowly become more and more mixed together. Like right now, am I playing a little bit? Yeah. Am I picking my time? Well, not really. That was a little different. You guys pick the time. But the idea of saying we'll have fewer and fewer hours in conventional jobs, that's happening. Okay. But that's not going to be the majority of the future, I don't think. Majority of the future is flexible time, flexible place, flexible everything, and tele everything. So which means you may work more hours, but you're setting your own time, and maybe you're setting what you want to do. So it may not be considered work. Like 100 years ago, if somebody saw what we are doing, looked into the future, saw us like today, they would say, you're not working. That's not work. You're playing around. You're just talking. That's not work, right? Now in the information knowledge economy, we say, yeah, that's work. So even the concept of when you're working, when you're not working, all that comes to be much more flexible and diverse. Let me see if there's some others here. Do you believe it could be better to study half presently and half virtually? Oh, yeah. Okay, on the virtual learning and so forth. Oh boy, there was a good study done by Murray Turoff at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, I think in the late 1970s or early 80s. And they proved that online learning can be better than face-to-face. How's that possible? Okay, what they did is there's 4 courses, New Jersey Institute of Technology. 2 were dealing with computer stuff, and 2 were dealing with something else, sociology or something else. And the computer class, one was in person and one was totally online. And on the sociology one was in person and one was totally online. The professors of the computer were the same, and the professors of the sociology were the same. And that final test was the same. The people in the sociology group that learned online got slightly higher grade. Standard test. Secondly, the computer people did even better online because they didn't have to get used to the equipment because they're used to using the computer. So they did even better online than in person. Now, yes, there's more to education than passing a test. But by the definition, the way they have in schools today, that your learning is determined by or evaluated by a test. By that narrow definition, online learning can be much better than actually offline. Now, the whole socialization, we'll get used to being this way. In the early days of the telephone answering devices, you call up somebody 40 years ago, and you had like a little machine that would answer the phone. Many people would say, I can't talk to a machine. You know, call me back. I can't leave a message. Now, I mean, just a little bit after that, people started to say, you forgot to turn on your answering machine. I wanted to leave you a message. We get used to it. We'll get used to the idea of telepresence being like real presence. We'll get used to it. So more and more learning will be this, and this, even the social interactivity will be more and more like this. We'll get better and better and better and better at it. And the integration of virtual and physical will be so interdependent with virtual reality and augmented reality, and the pixels get better and better and better and better. We can get to a point that the actual pixel information, which it becomes a voxel, 3-dimensional pixel, gets to be so good that the actual virtual reality will be more vivacious, more alive, more information than the physical reality. We'll get used to it, is what I'm trying to say. And sure, there'll be a mix. Of course, there'll be a mix. But don't discount the idea that the world cannot afford the best education in the world the way we structure it today. So we're going to have to go to more virtual and virtual learning. We'll also go to just-in-time learning. So when you make a product, engineers, listen up to this. When you make a product, also make up a virtual reality program of how the thing fits together and gets repaired and fixed. So that later, when somebody uses a physical thing and it needs to be fixed, they don't go off to a training program. They go to a real live thing with an online virtual reality thing. So you can see in virtual space the thing you're fixing and how you're supposed to fix it. So you got your hand mixed with the virtual reality together, and you're fixing them all the time like this, so that you don't have to stop work to learn something. You'll have just-in-time knowledge with this kind of a system. In my case, you're moving around. See, what are the opportunities that COVID brings to humankind? Well, I hope I made that clear. The main opportunity is brought to us is the ability to think together as a species, not simply as a nation, not simply as a man or woman, but as a species worldwide. That is unique. That's an extraordinary opportunity. And I hope we'll use it well, like you are using this now. Use it well to do this global thinking. How can we put things together? You know, when bees migrate from one area to another, they swarm, they go around. They're sharing all their information. You know, because they got to move the hive. They got to get it all together. Then boom, they move. hopefully we can do the same thing around the world with pandemic timeout, so we can move to a new age eventually. Let's see what else. Could you give us some examples about autonomous system and civilization? Sure. Let's say you take something like flooding. You can have sensors along a river, and a big storm is coming up, and so you have the sensor to tell you how the water is flowing, to tell you to have an artificial intelligence system knowing when to let the spillway go a certain way, or when to let it go by. You can think of all those things in civilization that have to be done. Can they be done by software instead of by human? For example, increasingly we're seeing more and more hospitals and public places being sprayed by robots. China's doing a lot of this sort of stuff. Cities become a integrated information system, a collective intelligence system, so that as you're monitoring traffic, you can send information to people to go over there. Well, you didn't have a traffic cop, you did not have a newscaster, you have a system that is communicating with your car to say, oh, you got to go over there. Or if it's automatic car, it automatically goes this way. So that think of all the things that we need: shelter, food production. For an example, I would love to see done sometime in the Sahel Desert in Africa. Imagine closed environment agriculture. That's like these little covered areas for agriculture. Imagine them being hundreds of miles long. And then in the middle, a railroad track, and then a robot taking care of this, the watering, the fertilizer. You don't need as much fertilizer in that system, by the way. You don't need as much water in it. And then every other row can be photovoltaic, producing the energy, so that Africa Sahel could be a food producer and an energy exporter. So there's so many things that we can automate. We just haven't begun to think about it. So there's some simple examples of automation that we can do. Let's see what else we got here. Question, no voice. Uh-oh, okay. Let's see, we wait for a new order where we work fewer hours. I answered that one. Good morning, let's see. Thank you for information, but I don't know it's relevant. It can change. Yeah, it can change. Yeah, no question. But I've been doing futures research for 50 years and people still listen to me, so I must have made some sense. What are the opportunities? I said that one. Thank you so much. In my case, classes get worse results. In my case, art classes can get worse results or better ones. I don't understand that. Anyway, thank you so much. That's the relationship. How much will the relationship between USA and Latin America in science and technology be? Well, hopefully the idea of co-laboratories becomes normalized. If we can connect our laboratories in virtual space, and we have common protocols for databases, and we're using more computational science. Look, if you're not aware of it, do some Google search on computational chemistry, computational physics, computational engineering, computational biology. And that can be shared simultaneously. So where you are becomes less important as long as you have the same shared computational engineering, or physics, or whatever you're working on. I suspect that this is going to happen more and more and more. I don't see how anything slowing that down. Let's see. Do you believe it would be better to study? I already answered that one. So, good morning. Thank you for your information. But I think that's probably all the questions I got there. Let's see. In my case, messages are getting worse. Yeah, the world gets the general trend of the world integrating on science and technology is just so clear. We like to joke in Silicon Valley that if you're doing a software architecture session where you're putting together the basic idea of software, if there's not an Indian accent from India, if there's nobody in there from India, it's not a serious meeting. So we just automatically assume somebody from India has to be involved in a software meeting because they're so good. There's so many of them. The integration of science and technology on a global basis is just overwhelming trend. It's one of the strongest trends you can think about. So it's more a question of like, what do you want to do? What are you willing to push to get done? Which do you think will be the new world order after? Okay, well, one of the lessons of my 50 years or so of futures research is that whatever you look at, it becomes more complex than you think. So if your question is dealing with the geopolitical order, imagine how the geopolitical order can become far more complex, and then double it and more complex. Imagine how you can have companies or countries, and the distinction between a country and a company gets blurred as well. But imagine you have software's interactivity that becomes a company. I mean, essentially no people other than the investors into it that does a lot of work. And it gets feedback from the shareholders, but the actual work is done by this interactivity. These things, you can also have countries. You can, like, for example, Japan is losing population every year, right? Birth rates are going down. Now, Japan has a lot of interesting culture. We don't want to lose that. So you could actually create a tele-Japan. You could have Japanese outside of Japan collaborating with Japanese inside Japan. So the distinction of where you are living is not so important as it is the culture of Japan. So the culture can be a common denominator, but not necessarily the geography. That's what I mean by making it more complex. So that's geopolitical complexity. So imagine that you have the original organization for society. Well, was power, but physical power. But the social organization was religion. Religion is what pulled us together. Then government created new power on top of that. It didn't get rid of religion. Religion's still here. But government invented a new power. There's a famous painting in France of Napoleon when he is becoming an emperor. The religious leader in France has his crown on a pillow, and he's going to put the crown on Napoleon's head. Napoleon goes, I crown myself. Symbolically, that's a transition from state being controlled by religion to government grows power on top of it. Now today, you've got corporations creating power on top of governments. Governments are still there. They're still doing the rules, the legislation, all of that. But corporate power is a new kind of a power we did not have before. And then eventually, although people not here yet, eventually individuals will have even new power. The power of the individual will increase a great deal more than the past. We're not right there yet. So that's part of that kind of an evolution. Another examples, let's see. And I mentioned at the last slide that increasingly, I think that we will move to a complexity of interactivity of human consciousness and technology so that the distinctions will start to blur. For example, when email began, wasn't called email, it was computer-mediated communication began, you'd have a telephone and a computer. Now, they're different things, but in the act of an email, you could not separate them because it wouldn't work. You could distinguish between them, you know the difference, but you could not separate them. Increasingly, civilization will become so complex between consciousness and technology that you won't be able to separate them. It'll be a continuous flow. Like, for example, when we talk on telephone today, am I talking to you or a machine? Well, you see, I'm talking to you. Well, that's not true. I'm talking to a machine, we talk to a machine, talk to a machine, talk to you, to talk to some bones in your ears, to talk to a brain, It's a lot of steps in between my talking to you. But we just say there's a perceptual space. I'm just talking to you. We get over it. Civilization, I think, will go like that. But the quality of it is not guaranteed. My own feeling is if we can take the attitude of the mystic, not necessarily religion, because that's an ideology, but the mystic attitude of divinely interconnected world, the universe, and all that sort of stuff, and the pleasure of sharing consciousness and all that. If we take the attitude of the mystic and the technology of the technocrat, if we can get the technocrat and the mystic to have an interactivity, if we can make a blend between the consciousness we take as we create civilization and the feedback from what is created to enhance the consciousness, if we can make that, then that's a new kind of paradigm for us. And I think that that's a direction we go. And that, again, goes back to self-actualization part. Now, when people figure that's idealistic, which it is, but I want you to remember that in 1980, half the world was in extreme poverty, and there's fewer people. Today, there's less than 10%. Yes, the pandemic is going to throw another 500 million people in extreme poverty, but we'll get out of that. The overall trend is poverty reduction. That's the way we're going. The basic needs of humanity are being met. There's a psychologist named Abraham Maslow who came up with what's called the hierarchy of human needs: the physical needs, the esteem needs, the love and belongingness needs, and eventually self-actualization. I think society will go through a similar thing. We're in the process of getting the physical needs done. Granted, 10% is still in a mess. And even 50% is not great, right? But we're moving in that direction, that the physical needs are being met. Second, because of the internet, a lot of our love and belongingness needs and self-esteem needs are being met online. Yes, there's polarization. Yes, there's information overload. Yes, there's all of it, but we're learning how to live with it. It's like we haven't adjusted to the information age yet. We just don't know how to behave completely. As we do, then when these other needs are met, then the next becomes self-actualization. How does society self-actualize, as well as how does the individual self-actualize? Just like the individual worker in the industrial age has a certain activity and an understanding, in the self-actualization age, in the conscious technology age, they'll also have that. So that goes back to the idea that the individuals become far more powerful than they were before. That's probably enough for me at this point. Anyway, let's see. Can you give us some advice to accelerate technological change in countries like Peru? Okay, yeah. One of the things you could do is create a collective intelligence system for the country. Now, by a collective intelligence system, I mean the synergies among information, knowledge, hardware, software, and humans, such that each can change each other, like your brain. So this should be something online, so that if you want to have classified information, you keep it off. You want to have proprietary information, you keep it off. But what you are willing to share, put on a common space. And you can even have, various protocols and controls within it, of course. But the general public should know the mind of Peru. How do you put together the virtual mind of Peru? Think about that. And then that will speed up a lot of this sort of stuff. Because if you have a good virtual computational engineering program or programs, then a college student or a high school student could use that, run some experiments, and all of a sudden they're in the game. They could actually patent things, at an early age. So think about how you take the best of the minds, the knowledge of Peru, not just in libraries, but online. How do you integrate that? That should become a national project of every country in the world. Have I rattled on long enough, you think? What do you think? Let's see. Comment about recover and rethink of Peruvian ancestral technology. Like we will know hydraulics engineering. Yeah, well, that goes back to create a collective intelligence system for Peru. That's what I would suggest. Try to, I'm happy to help along the way, but think about how you create your own collective intelligence system for the country. It becomes a national resource. Okay? Yes?
Thank you very much, Jaron Glim, por su participación. Muy amable.
Dear
Muy bien.
Jerome Glenn, in the name of Dean of the College of Engineering of Peru and Future Innovation Corp, we thank you for your participation in the first Congress. We believe that in the framework of this difficult situation due to the COVID-19, we can join forces in favor of our society with the highest technical level and technological support, being convinced that your reflections will serve as a great help to get strategic in favor of our region. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would quickly add before you cut me off, is I'm hoping that you will read the COVID scenarios and then say, what should we do in our own country? So you use those as just an excuse to create your own scenarios. Thank you.
Thank
nice
you.
talking to you all.
Okay.
Have a happy future.
Gracias, Sergio. Continúa, por favor.
Ok. Muy bien, muchas gracias nuevamente a Jaron Glim.